Good morning. The next 20 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is to talk about weeds, weed control in young citrus, what works and what to watch out for. So I try to give this slide, one slide, reiterating why weed management matters in citrus. But today, I want to say that when it comes to young citrus, the impact of weeds are much more pronounced. For instance, competition for resources. We all know that weeds are gonna steal all the resources that should be otherwise available for your young trees. And for young trees, expanding root system, more canopy production and things like that. So they are in an active growth stage. So they need all the resources they want. Then susceptibility to pest and diseases. So we have observed when you have weeds, the canopy of young citrus are very low compared to the mature citrus. So we have a lot of weeds. They are going to harbor a lot of moisture. So pests and diseases, especially fungal diseases, the chance for incidence is very high. Root system. So I'm not showing the data here, but we looked at it and we saw that if you have perennial weeds such as sedges or guinea grass and things like that, it can interfere with that expanding root system of young citrus. So it can reduce it. So all these factors are going to impact on the canopy as well. So we found if you have a high weed pressure, like more than or 70% of the weed coverage in a tree row, in a young citrus establishing row, it can reduce the citrus canopy to about 25 to 30%. So there will be a lot of effects when it comes to weed management, weed presence in young citrus. So new planting is all about optimism, a lot of enthusiasm and hope, and a lot of investment. So we all know that this trees has to be vigorous and has to go strong to full production. And I believe weed management, a good weed management is one of the components that helps the citrus trees to go through this process. We heard about a lot of management practices earlier today, but weed control should be also part of the equation. So I'm covering two aspects of weed control in young citrus. What works, what are some of the ways that we can bring to the table for effective management, and what to watch out for, and what are some of the issues and how to address those while doing that. So let's focus on what works for young citrus weed management. So let's think about a timeline of a citrus grove establishment. So it starts with site preparation or pre-planting. Then in the first year, we have planting and early establishment. Then in the next couple of years, there will be tree development and 3 to 5 years early production stage, right? So I want to focus my talk on the strategies I'm going to talk in these 5 years. First 5 years, or I would like to say as grove establishment. So if you think about site preparation, so as we all say, we have to start it really clean. That holds true for a citrus planting as well. So we need to make sure all the weeds are burnt out, all the weeds are cleaned up. So when it comes to site preparation, we have a lot of post-emergence options, but I always ask the growers to stay away from residual herbicides because residual herbicides are designed to stay in the soil, in the few inches of the soil, and to suppress the weed seeds to germinate. So there can be a chance of carryover phytotoxicity, especially when you plant. The new planting coming into the ground, its roots can be impacted. And some of these residual herbicides are root growth inhibitor type mode of action as well. So stay away from residual herbicides if you can. If you really must use residual herbicide, give enough pre-plant interval time. Contact herbicides are the best tools here because again, like Remaxon or AIM, carfentrazone active ingredient, they don't stay in the soil for a long time and also they don't leave a lot of residues for root uptake or impact of the roots as well. But glyphosate can be an excellent tool as well, especially if you have a lot of perennials, like sedges, as I mentioned, you may have to use glyphosate. If you use glyphosate, make sure you have a good pre-plant interval, such as 3 to 4 weeks. If you plant the new planting, the new reset, within this, before this time frame, it might impact the root, and there will be a root uptake and things like that. Apart from this, since we don't have any residual herbicide, the burn down stubble has to be out of the way, so disking or cultivation can be used to incorporate back the stubbles back into the ground. I have seen growers using cover crops or mulches, but this has to be paired with good post-emergence programs because there can be weed growth from mulching and things like that. Now, focusing on the first year, the planting and the early establishment, we have some post options available, but there are restrictions. For example, do not use 240 or embed extra, which is gaining some popularity for broadleaf control, but do not use it during the first year of control, first year of planting. And again, it's important to use low rates as well, because the trees are getting acclimated, getting adjusted to after the planting. So high rates can be a problem. There can be some injury symptoms. And most of the herbicide product label says avoid spray contact with the green tissues. And we always, it's a standard practice to use the porous wraps around the stem, so that will take care of it, most of it. When it comes to pre, again, there are limited options. One of the residual herbicide that we can use immediately after planting is norflurazone with the trade name Solicam, because they don't, their mode of action is residual, and it actually act only on the weed seed. So there may be less impact on the developing or growing trees. Then the next couple of years, that time the tree development phase, we have more broader post options available. And again, stay away from the 240 if you can, and apply with caution, because there is still, we need to make sure there are no contacts and things like that. More pre-emergence options. In the time, we can bring in Chateau, flumioxazine into the table. They can be used after first year of planting. And when it comes to the early production, 3 to 5 years, almost all post-emergence are available. Basically, you can go back to your program of choice. But one thing I want to bring to the table here is the glyphosate use before the production, or before when there is a fruit hanging on the tree. So we have been doing some works to look at how glyphosate impact the fruits. So we found that, we published a paper, and we found that if you have high rates of glyphosate applied within the 8 to 10 weeks of harvest, it can significantly reduce the fruit detachment force, and it could be a driving factor, one of the driving factors for fruit drop. If there's a chance for fruit drop, there's a glyphosate application, there can be a fruit drop. So stay away from glyphosate, or avoid glyphosate if you are picking within 8 weeks. But there was no impact on young fruits or fruit during fruit setting or anything like that, only on the mature fruits. But you can resume the glyphosate after the harvest. So keep that in mind. When it comes to pre or residual programs for early production stage, there is a greater flexibility. Most of the pre-emergence herbicides can be used. So I put together a table looking at several restrictions, age restrictions, specifically age restrictions for citrus post-emergence. These are some of the post-emergence. This is not an exhaustive table. We have now some production guide with all the herbicide listed there. We have quick reference guides where the information is condensed and made into a table format, which you can grab from our demonstration table or from the lobby. So if you look at this, only 240 has that restriction. It should not be applied first year. They say it can, there is a chance it can be applied in the second year, but in our observation, personal observation, it's worthy to wait for 3 to 4 years to go into a 240 program, because it's highly volatile and there can be chances of foliage injury and things like that. And as I mentioned earlier, during the 5 years, definitely avoid the contact with the green tissues, especially bark and foliage. But things are different for pre-emergence. If you look at the table here, there are several restrictions. As I mentioned, residual herbicide can stay in the soil, and there can be some root exposure and things like that. There are some products available. As I mentioned, norflurazone, it can be applied after planting. Flumioxazine can be applied in the first year if you have a trunk protection, but on a safer side of things, you can start that program in the second year onwards in a establishing grow. Now, a couple of other reminders, as I mentioned, lower label rates in new plantings. So there is a follow-up point for this. It is very important to actually treat the weeds early, because you're using low rates. Then if the weeds become mature, the control can be ineffective. One of the things that we often overlook is the row middle vegetation management, and it could be a source for weed seeds or seeds to deposit in the tree rows. And again, basically it includes using post-emergence herbicide like glyphosate, especially paired with mowing. If you're mowing, you have to mow it before seed setting. Or one thing that we found really effective is mow them before seed setting and give it a couple of weeks, probably 7 to 10 days, and do a very low rate of glyphosate application. And rates and things like that are provided in the table that you can grab. So this reduces the mowing frequency. So we call this chemical mowing, and it's a great strategy that if you want to reduce the number of mowings in raw material. So raw material vegetation is very important as well. So that are some of the few points I want to bring to the table on what are some of the effective strategies, chemical or non-chemical, that we can utilize in establishing growth. Now let me switch gears to what to watch for. What are some of the challenges we have? So one of the biggest challenges, you need to manage the weeds without killing the tree, right? Any wrong approach or misapplication can set trees back, because these are very tender trees trying to establish, so any chemical exposure can be problematic. But for mature trees, they are more tolerant to some of this chemical exposure. So you're looking at a picture of a completely fried up citrus tree row, complete dieback from a misapplication. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So, you know, how you can say there are some injuries or herbicide application problems. So you see a lot of symptoms such as mottling come out of nowhere, bleaching or yellowing. Sometimes you see leaf cupping, then leaf strapping or needle-like deformation. This is typical for glyphosate. The leaf cupping is due to 2,4-D exposure and things like that. Then vein yellowing. This is from a diuron, Carmex injury. Then leaf spotting from aim or paraquat contact. So many of these symptoms are in line with physiological stresses or maybe nutrient deficiencies and things like that. But if you think about it, if you see the symptoms coinciding with your recent herbicide application, then herbicide injury could be on the radar, and we can think about that direction. And sometimes the injury comes out just like yellowing, and the trees are going to bounce back. With good irrigation and good care, it's going to come back. But at severe level, you might see a lot of dieback, like I showed you in the earlier picture. So the range of symptoms or the effect depends on how extent that exposure is. Let me talk about two pathways of exposure here, herbicide exposure in an establishing growth. One is spray contact, as you all know. Then not so much thought about, but again, very important that I want to bring to the table is root uptake. So let me focus on the spray contact. So now we are spraying a herbicide. We took all the care. We made sure all the spray settings are correct. You're spraying it, but you still see symptoms. Why? Because that's because of the unique Florida weather. Think about it. We have very less canopy, small trees, sandy soils. Perfect combination for a very hot soil conditions. So what happens, even with utmost care, when you apply, the spray is going to hit the hot soil and bounce back. The droplets are going to bounce back into the canopy, and you see a lot of symptoms, and there will be an exposure there. So some of the things that we can utilize, we can bring to the table to address this, use low pressure. I know growers like to use something around 15 to 30 psi, but having at below 20 psi spray pressure, this reduces the chance for finer droplets, ultra finer droplets. So we did a study and we found that finer and ultra fine droplets can actually travel up to 1/3 of a mile. So think about that. If you apply here, it's going to reach few feet apart. So there's a chance of that. So also pair it with right nozzle size that produce coarse droplets. Never use it nozzles that produce fine droplets or ultra fine droplets. And drift reduction agents or drift retarding agents are very good. There are a lot of products out there that actually reduces the chance for drift and things like that. Another thing is the spray boom setup, which is something that we often overlook. The off-center nozzle. So think about this. Off-center nozzle, which is at the tip of that boom, actually determines how far and how high the spray goes. In this example, it's a 0 to 10 degree. If you increase that angle to 40 degree, look at how high it goes. This is perfect in mature growth. In fact, it's a great system because you can control a lot of weeds on the other side of the bandwidth, especially when you work in swales or flatwood areas. But with young trees, remember, the canopy is very low. So this high is going to raise the canopy. So make sure if you're working in a young grow, make sure the OC-NOC angle is less than 40, definitely 10 to 20 degrees, great. And you have to maybe trial and see which works and which not. And one thing I've seen the applicators often miss, they apply a mature grow and they come back to a new resetting area. They forget to change the angle, then that will be a problem. Then IPCs, I mean, we heard about IPCs, it's a pretty norm these days. So when you have IPCs, often what we see is loosened IPCs because of wind and things like that. So what happens is the herbicide it will form a cloud and get into the IPCs and get trapped in there, which is going to make a lot of issues. So make sure the IPCs are tied very nicely and intact before you plan for a herbicide spray program. So when you think about the root uptake, the other aspect of this, we have done a lot of work on how herbicide move in sandy, unique Florida sandy soils. Sandy, we found that always compared to other soil types, sandy soils, there is more movement. It could be runoff, it could be leaching and things like that. And when it comes to the new planting, the soil is still settling in the first year. So there's going to be a lot of channels. There's a higher chance of herbicide leaching and get uptook by the growing plant. So water, especially the rain and irrigation, drives the herbicide more into the root zone. So herbicides can impact the roots. I'm not showing an example from citrus, but I have a study. One of our students, we looked at tomato, how the new transplant behaves, the root system behaves to herbicide. You can see this is something with herbicide exposure, residual herbicide in the soil, but without, you can see the root mass. So again, as I mentioned, some of these herbicides are seedling root growth inhibitor mode of action, so they can have an impact on the root. So make sure, do not avoid spraying ahead of a heavy rain. A little bit of rain is good for residual herbicide to activate it, but if you have a severe weather event coming, severe rain coming, make sure or postpone the application. It's going to leach the herbicide into the root zone and there will be consequential uptake. And irrigation, manage your irrigation timing in such a way you're not irrigating immediately after the herbicide. This is true for post-emergence as well. It's going to reduce the efficacy of the post-emergence, and whatever is reaching the soil can be leached down as well. Then soil binding or deposition agents are a great tool. There are several products out there. It will make sure that the herbicide stays in the top few inches of the soil. Now, that I'm going to wrap up now because shortage of time, but still something I want to reiterate what I mentioned in the previous slides. Manage the young growths differently than your mature blocks. They're developing, they're very sensitive. So, but you need to control the weeds at the same time. You have to make sure it's safe as well. The follow tree age restrictions of the label. Use low label rates if possible in young plantings, and get the spray timing, calm, cooler conditions, and boom setup, and things like that. Teeny tiny things we can change can make a big difference. So we all know that weed-free growths are important. Healthy trees definitely lead to faster, stronger establishment that we are all hoping for. That's all. Many of the information I showed come from the research of my students and postdoc. I have to thank them, collaborators. Many of the work has been done in grows. So thank you, and all the funding agencies. And this was I was talking about, the quick reference guides. It's a condensed information you can throw in your truck, look at all the specifications, rates, and restrictions. And happy weed management. Let's kill some weeds. Thank you.